Addiction is when the brain has been encoded to see, to feel the excitement, the joy, the motivations that comes from eating a certain kind of food, indulging in a certain kind of activity, and also doing certain things that result or help us find survival. We find satisfaction in doing them, in as much as they may not be good. That is what we call addiction. And we have been addicted to it so much so that if we do not engage in doing those things or eating those foods or practicing certain habits, then we do not feel okay or satisfied. And it has become now a part of our lives. We are now living doing these things as a medium of we finding satisfaction. Let us look at the physical causes of addiction. How do we get addicted to certain habits, certain foods, and indulge in certain activities? We can never talk about addiction when we are not focusing on the work of the brain. In my definition, I made it clear to you that we reach what is called addiction. We are addicted when the brain has been programmed to see the joy, to find that satisfaction, to see that motivation that we seek for our survival. So, what therefore is in the brain that makes sure that we are addicted to certain things that we shouldn't be addicted to? In the brain, we are going to be talking about three things, three major things, even though we will be adding other things to it. All these things form part of the reward system in the brain. In the reward system of the brain is something or a chemical which we call dopamine. The dopamine is a chemical messenger, or we can also call it a neurotransmitter. This neurotransmitter or a chemical messenger releases pleasure. I said pleasure, joy, motivation, satisfaction. For instance, when we are eating our favorite food, there is this that makes that particular food our favorite food. What is that? That which make us call that particular food our favorite food is no other thing but the pleasure we derive in eating that particular food. And what releases the pleasure? It is the chemical messenger that is found in the reward system of the brain that make us find pleasure in eating that particular food. We cannot also forget the function of what is called the gamma aminobutyric acid, simply put, GABA. The gamma aminobutyric acid is also the brake of the brain. For example, every car or every vehicle has its brake system, and then the vehicle also has an accelerator. So the productivity of the brain at a certain rate is determined by the acceleration of the brain. We cannot also neglect the function of one part of the brain, which is the glutamate. While the glutamate is being responsible for the acceleration or the effective productivity of the brain, then the chemical or the neurotransmitter, which is also a brake system called the GABA, is ensuring that no, the brain does not function at the rate it desires or at the rate which is being enforced by the glutamate. So while the glutamate is doing its best in making sure that the brain is functioning consistently, the brain is functioning at a very high rate, then the GABA, which is the gamma aminobutyric acid, is also ensuring that there is a brake system. Take a pause. They're telling the brain, oh, brain, you are working too much. Take a pause. Slow down your activities. So The GABA slows down the activity of the brain. So if the GABA is slowing down the activity of the brain, and then we also have the glutamate accelerating the activity of the brain, how do these three things, these three parts, component of the brain, affect or lead or decide or determine addiction? Do your best to share the link, ask people to subscribe, and also share the video. All right, so let's look at the dopamine. Everybody has his or her favorite, and everybody has feelings. As a matter of fact, feelings, satisfaction, pleasure are registered in the brain. When we are hungry, even though we are hungry, even though we want to eat a certain kind of food, or we want to eat something, why? Because the stomach is empty, and therefore there is a desire for food. It is not any food which we find pleasure in eating it. So that feeling, that pleasure, that satisfaction, that joy is decided by the reward system, which releases a chemical messenger or a neurotransmitter called the dopamine. So while we are eating the food, if we find the food satisfactory, if we find pleasure in eating that food, if we find the food delicious, or the vice versa, in other words, if we do not find the food delicious, very tasty to eat, it means that the dopamine does not conform or does not explain to the brain that this is what makes me feel that I am eating what makes me satisfied. It is the dopamine that tells the joy in the eating of the food. It is the dopamine that tells that taste, that sweetness, that this particular food, when I eat it, I find it tasty. I find it delicious. And other food, I do not find it. I do not find or register the same pleasure I find in this kind of food in other kinds of food. As soon as the dopamine is stimulated or released, then the reaction toward a certain kind of taste is also activated. The reaction toward a certain kind of pleasure is also activated. So even though the body is hungry, yet the body doesn't call for just any food, but the kind of food which the dopamine has registered pleasure in. That this kind of food is what gives the human being eating the food, or the body eating the food, that kind of satisfaction, that kind of motivation to eat more, to call for more, not necessarily because the person is hungry. For example, if you are hungry and you are given just any food, you and I can know that if the food is not the kind of food that you really like, as soon as you eat just a small portion of the food, you can say that you are full and therefore you wouldn't eat the food anymore. But when you're given your kind of food, which the dopamine has helped you to register some taste, some pleasure in it, you are able to eat a large chunk of the food. Why? Because the dopamine has registered your pleasure in eating that particular food. So the dopamine is a joy activator. So the dopamine is also a stimulator of pleasure, and it also enhances our motivation to do one particular thing for long, to engage or indulge in one activity for long. Why? Because the dopamine tells me that the more I smoke, the more I take alcohol, then I feel at ease, I feel comfortable, I feel that pleasure because there is this dopamine that has been released into my body that helps me to feel that this thing which I am indulging or the activities I find myself in, it's making me feel satisfied. There are natural activities which the body releases, or the reward system of the brain releases dopamine to decide the pleasure in it. And there are other activities or other things which are not natural or built in the system or in the body or in the brain, but we introduce them to the body. For example, when you are taking in drug, that chemical may not be in the body or may not be of a high standard in the body. Yet when we take them, we are introducing the high level part of the same chemical, which maybe it might have been built in the body, but that level, that high level of it is not in the body. And so it does not create any harm, it does not create any chaos, or it does not activate that pleasure that we find when we take a higher portion of it as and when we introduce them into the body. Let's look at something. We are introducing a drug into the body, and the drug which we are introducing into the body, they may help us find satisfaction. They may help us find satisfaction. For example, when you take alcohol on a high level, what the alcohol does is that when we finally find ourselves under the influence of the alcohol reduces the activity of the GABA, the effectiveness of the GABA. And so when the effectiveness of the GABA, that is the gamma aminobutyric acid, which is also a neurotransmitter or a chemical messenger, when the GABA is released, it slows down the activity of the brain. And so once the GABA is a brake system in the brain, and it is slowing down the productivity, the production of the brain. So if the brain is working on, let's say, 10% rate, 10% high rate, and now the GABA is activated, it brings down the productivity of the brain to, let's say, 5% work rate. And that is how the brain functions. And so once the gamma aminobutyric acid is released, there is release into the system that particular neurotransmitter. And that particular neurotransmitter slows down the activities of the brain. And when the activities of the brain is being slowed down, something happens. And that is the glutamate also loses its effectiveness. So once the glutamate is losing its effectiveness, it does not enhance the proper functioning, the effective function of the prefrontal cortex of the brain. The prefrontal cortex of the brain is responsible for enforcing judgment. It is also responsible for ensuring self-control, and it is also responsible for planning. When alcohol is taken and introduced into the body, we have alcohol in excess form. Even though naturally the body has a certain level of alcohol in it, and once the body has a certain level of alcohol in it, and it is good for the activities of the brain and the movement of the body, if we introduce foreign, I'm using the word foreign in the sense that what we have in the body is used to the body, and so the body is aware of that particular alcohol. Now we are introducing a certain level which may be of higher in chemical components as compared to that which the body has in it. So now when we are introducing these foreign substances into the body, and the brain releases that dopamine when that alcohol has been taken in excess, and the brain begin to find certain satisfaction when there is a break in the function of the glutamate, that is the effective productivity or the effective functioning of the brain. The person whose brain activity has been made to slow down, the person begin to feel more relaxed, more stress free, and less anxious. And so if the person is in the problem of maybe raising money to pay school fees, because the brain is made not to work at that rate, the worry of raising that money to pay the school fees become less, because the GABA has now reduced the effectiveness of the brain. And therefore, if let's say there will be that pressure, go and pay the school fees, go and pay the school fees, go work and pay the school fees, now you care less about the school fees. Why? Because the brain has been made to slow down, and therefore that which should stimulate or activate the need for that particular work to be done, for that particular school fees to be paid, has been reduced. And it is all as a result of the intake of the alcohol. So once you take in the alcohol and you find that pleasure, the pleasure of, now I feel relaxed, now I feel stress free, now I feel less anxious. And everybody living on earth wants to feel this way. Let's not neglect that fact. We want to feel stress free. We want to feel less anxious. We want to feel less of our worry. Therefore, the moment we introduce the chemical, the moment we introduce something, the moment we engage in a certain activity, and then we find that pleasure, we find that satisfaction, we find that joy in it, we will go back and be doing them continuously because we find pleasure in it. And it is the chemical messenger, the neurotransmitter called the dopamine, that will help us to find pleasure in that activity, in indulging in that activity, in doing that particular thing, in eating that junk food, even though the food is not good for you. You and I know it. But the dopamine has made us find some taste, find some pleasure, find some joy. Aduane wey dey though, this food is delicious. So even though the doctors have cautioned you, you have been told that it is not good for your health, yet because the dopamine helps you to register some pleasure in it, you still want to go back in there and eat that which you have been cautioned not to eat. So we are being addicted to things. Why? Because there are part of the brain called the reward system, and there are part of the brain called the GABA, or the neurotransmitters, that help us to remind ourselves of things we did which we felt satisfied, things we did which we felt like we were on top of the world, things we did which we felt stress free. We were not anxious of anything because this part of the brain help us to find pleasure in them. There is another part of the brain called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is very vital in new memory formation. When we were not under the influence of the things that we introduced into the body, or when we were not under the influence of the pleasure that we had, when we were not indulging in the activity that resulted in that pleasure, there was a certain memory that we had. And the memory was, we need to plan for this, for our future, we need to plan for our education, we need to buy things for our homes, we need to take care of our family. We had that memory. But when we have finally registered satisfaction and pleasure and joy in taking certain things, that deactivate or reduce the work of the hippocampus, which is also part of the brain that is very vital in forming new memories. So we don't want to be thinking about the things that we are supposed to be doing. We don't want to bother ourselves with planning, because it is difficult to plan. It is difficult to set up businesses. It is difficult to take responsibilities. Let me put it that way. And so because we want to run away from our responsibilities, we don't want to stay in that particular memory that reminds us those responsibilities. Those responsibilities are things we want to avoid. They put us into stress. They make us worry. They make us more anxious, and therefore we want to run away from them. It is normal as human beings to find yourself in that condition and in that position. The hippocampus, which is very vital in forming new memories. For example, the mindset that we need, the kind of brain, the kind of intellect, the kind of intelligence that we need in structuring, drawing plans, in enhancing self control, those chemicals we need in forming those new brain that will help us to overcome the challenges. There is this gap between the memory that will always lead us or remind us of our responsibilities, and therefore there is another kind of memory we build when there is pleasure. Okay, what memory do we build when we find pleasure? For example, someone watching pornography. Okay, let me put it this way: a man and a woman, a husband and a wife having intimacy, okay, doing sexual intercourse. When the woman decides to ask anything from the husband will promise it and will say, I will do it. Why? Because the husband finds himself at a certain level of pleasure. It's that level of pleasure he is enjoying at the moment the wife is asking for those things or demanding for those things. It's on the high side. So, have you seen it? Left to the man alone, if the man is not in that level of pleasure, should the wife ask for those things, it is a no-no. That is one memory. Now we are going to create another memory. The pleasure in which the man finds himself is now forcing the man, helping the man, motivating the man, say that because of what you enjoy, give out what the person is demanding for. A new memory. A new memory. So when we introduce certain pleasures which we find in certain activities and certain things, what happens is that we are unable to create new memories that help us to solve our problems and move on. We are unable to do that. It is because the dopamine in the reward system of the brain, which is also a neurotransmitter and a chemical messenger, has activated some joy, some pleasure, some satisfaction in that which we do, in that which we have introduced into the body. And therefore, when we are there and we want to run away from our problem, the next thing that we do is that we go back and take in the alcohol. The next thing that we do, anytime when we are there, we are being reminded of this pleasure that we had when we were doing certain or when we were being engaged in certain activities. For example, the watching of pornography, and then you see that pleasure is registered in the mind, and so when we are there, we want to find ourselves in that level of pleasure. That is what leads to what is called addiction. So we have become addicted to the things not because we want to do them, but because we have programmed the brain to find satisfaction, to find joy, to find motivation, and to find pleasure in doing them. And everybody as a human always want to be doing something that makes him or her happy. So if it is a pornography that makes you happy, helps you to survive boredom, then you go back to it. Why? Because there is some amount of pleasure that has been registered in it. And so we are addicted to it because it has been registered in our brain that this is what I did and I found pleasure. I was satisfied. I was okay. So while you are alone in the room and nothing is beside you, no one is around you, you feel a little bored. The next thing you remind yourself is the pleasure you found when you were engaged in certain things. And that is how come we are addicted. We want to stop, but we can't stop because We will not always have people around us. Your wife will go to work, your husband will go to work, your children will go to school. There are times when you will be alone in the house. And when you are alone, you remind yourself, the brain memory will tell you that this is what you did and you found pleasure, and that will activate that addiction again. So we are addicted to certain activities, we are addicted to certain behaviors, we are addicted to certain foods, we are addicted to certain kind of lifestyle, and they are now becoming our habit. Why? Because first of all, we did that, and then we registered the pleasure, the satisfaction that comes in doing those things in our mind, and therefore we always want to go back to that satisfaction. Share the link, subscribe to the link. It is when you subscribe, then we have more support to do it. So if we want to control addiction, it is not something that we can do and within a twinkle of an eye we are out of it. We are not going to look at how to come out of addiction, no, today. But then we are going to caution you that when you are not yet addicted to something, please and please again, please and please again, I will plead with you never to introduce yourself or introduce certain chemicals, introduce certain activities into your body or to your lifestyle. Make sure you set boundaries. Nobody knows the taste of sex until you engage in one. You do not know how sweet honey is until you taste it. So the best way to abstain from addiction is abstinence. Abstinence is the best way. What you don't know, what you have not tasted, don't go and taste. Because the moment you taste it and that pleasure and that satisfaction is registered in your mind, it becomes something that is hard to fight. So abstinence is the only way. Don't try betting if you are not into one, because the moment you try and you win, let's say you have $1,000 and then you feel like, okay, let me try more, then you win something like $800, then you feel like, okay, let me try more. It will become your habit. Why? Because you will find it the easiest way to make an income without stressing yourself. There are ways by which you can overcome addiction. So this is just part one of it.